Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The holidays are usually a happy time spent with family and loved ones, and time to reflect before the new year. But for some people, the holidays can bring on intense sadness if you have had a loss, or maybe you find yourself alone during the holidays. Maybe you lost a loved one, went through a divorce, or had some type of loss in your life. And maybe you're estranged from your family. These emotions can intensify, and it can be a very tough time for your mental health around the holidays. People can feel lonely and isolated even when they're at a holiday party, or if all these commercials that show a loving big family at the holidays crop up and you don't have any family. Holiday season anxiety is a well-documented phenomenon that I had never heard of, and it can include financial, family conflict, travel demands, social pressure, and at the same time, people living with chronic mental health conditions like anxiety disorders or depression or ADHD or OCD or bipolar disorder or eating disorders may find this holiday period especially challenging. Seasonal affective disorder can also be an issue, and Connecticut paid leave can help with up to 12 weeks of income replacement if you're suffering from a serious health condition like those mentioned above. Here to talk about the holidays and mental health and the struggles people may be going through is Mental Health Connecticut Clinical Care Coordinator and Licensed Master of Social Work, Patricia Sieber. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast, Patricia.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's such an important topic that a lot of people don't talk about around the holidays because it is sensitive. But why don't we start with, tell me a little bit about Mental Health Connecticut. What do you do and how can you help people during the holidays?
Mental Health Connecticut. What do we do? What don't we do? We work with the community of Connecticut and variety of regions, ranging from Danbury, Stanford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, Torrington, and some statewide community-based services in supporting people towards their recovery goals, typically towards recovery in different areas, depending on the program. We offer residential services where someone may need support towards their recovery goals of independence and building ADL skills or activities of daily living, learning things like budgeting, how to access benefits for the first time, and, really be a support through that process. First of all, be sure to include, Mental Health Connecticut. One of the, things about Mental Health Connecticut that I really am proud of is that it's very person-centered, the work we do across the board in the programs, whether it's in the residential, programs, community-based programs, our Mending Arts programs, which is a great program for the community, during the holidays, I think, season to access for extra support that I definitely like to mention. But we're very person-centered in what we do. So for some people, we do have the privilege of being vulnerable with them, in those moments, whether it's advocating with a therapist for being proactive in planning for a tough holiday season based off maybe their history. Struggling with one in the past.
And what do you do as a clinical care coordinator there, and how do you help people?
I support people clinically in a variety of ways at our agency. I'm really, really privileged in that way. I've been with the agency for a little over 13 years now.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah. That's a good long haul.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've worn many hats here, which really gives me, a very, again, privileged, I think, perspective into what we do from different areas. I've worked within our residential services, within our community-based programs for some of those services that happen in the community, working with someone towards independence in their home, with community providers in collaboration, such as with the Mental Health Waiver Program. I'm a big part of our Mental Health Concierge Program. We provide a lot of support for those that either at risk for a higher level of care, struggling to live independently in the community, or, maybe are already doing so, but may have an opportunity to live more independently if we have the right supports, in the home, provide our direct counseling services within our concierge program and waiver program, which I love that direct service.
So let's talk about mental health during the holiday season. Why does this season hit so hard?
I think what's tough about this season is, I love the phrase you just used there, hit so hard. I think everything is amplified if the holidays come, right? There is more pressure on what you're wearing to dinner. If you're experiencing joy, if, this time of year, brings you joy, that's a wonderful thing. But if you struggle, with mental health, and that's not your experience, makes me think of the Grinch there and how he didn't relate, the origin of the story there, is that he didn't relate to the who's in Whoville, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that story, as lovely as it is, it did end though in that big aha moment. His heart grew 3 sizes or what have you. Unfortunately, we don't have that aha light switch moment when we're talking about mental health during the holidays.
Yeah, because people, I think, dissociate, because the holidays can be really challenging. Like if you don't have family or you're estranged from your family, that isolation and loneliness is really palatable. And how can you help, or what would you suggest for people who are really struggling with maybe being estranged from their family, feeling not joyful, like you said? It is a joyful time for a lot of people, but some people don't find that joy.
I think in being proactively reactive, right? And for example, maybe when Halloween wraps up, right? Having it, right?
That's when it really starts. Like you see Christmas.
Is it just me?
Yeah, no, you see Christmas decorations out at Halloween. You do.
Like I feel like every year it's like sooner and sooner. Like, is it going to be with my, with the bikinis next year at the stores? You know what I mean? It does. It starts up a lot sooner for people. So I think, first of all, being aware of that, right? Like for me now, I no longer think of the holiday season in terms of everything that it takes to prepare, right? Or think about, and that includes prepare for self-care, right? I work at an agency where we have a really wonderful benefit, in terms of looking out for our time off, and also being very intentional time off. We get wellness time actually during the holidays. So, again, being intentional even with that self-care, right?
Yeah.
And how we plan for it, but also being intentional in, as I mentioned earlier, the first, I think, step in really getting to the root of maybe not resolving, but feeling comfortable and confident in addressing, right? Something that we're struggling with is identifying that we are. You mentioned disassociation earlier. It's not everyone's defense mechanism, but it certainly is common, right? And sometimes, that's a really great example of one. Sometimes when we use disassociation and let's say it's that estranged parent, right? And that song comes on from Elton John that reminds you of them, right? And you change it, and every other time of the year, that works. But today, it's not just changing that song. It's also seeing everybody posting pictures with their families. If this is not your first year of struggling with something like an estranged parent, definitely reflect back on last year. What worked, what didn't work, what rooms did not feel safe. I find, really helpful is identifying a safe person, that can definitely include a therapist, right, or provider, and maybe working with them, again, proactively, reactively, and taking some steps when you start to see Halloween come around and those pumpkins start to get a little old, right? To maybe start reaching out to your therapist saying, hey, I want to get ahead of this and plan for extra time.
Yeah, I think that's so smart to do that. I know that you have a winter wellness toolkit that talks about the holiday and mental health, and it even mentions self-care. Can you give me a few highlights from that toolkit?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a lot in there around seasonal affective disorder. I think that is really supportive. There's also a lot of resources, I think, that are just helpful for people to have, around it. Resources that are in the community.
I mentioned in the introduction the holiday season anxiety, and it talked about people who are suffering, and it can be financial, it can be a lot of things. Can you explain sort of what holiday season anxiety is?
Even for some people, it can even struggle their motivation at work, right? It can affect their mood, overall, just feeling down. We actually here in Connecticut don't realize that we're very susceptible to it because of our
Yes.
location alone.
Yeah, and
And
our vitamin D deficiencies that we all seem to suffer from.
we do.
Yeah.
We all do. I think I heard one person say, you can never have enough vitamin D. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of those things, that I think a lot of people brush off when we talk about mental health with things like sunlight, right? Especially with affective, with seasonal, affective disorder, because what can be tough is that, yeah, it can be easy to say, well, it's just the sun. It's just an hour difference. Whatever. What's the big deal? It is.
My best friend had that. She lived in New York and now she lives in California. There was a real reason for her leaving New York City and going to California. It really was debilitating for her.
Exactly.
So she's
That's where
very
my sister
happy there.
ended up, and she said the same. She didn't notice, that she struggled with it until she went out there, and started reflecting on their past. For your friend, did she notice a lot of symptoms that seemed similar to like almost a depressive episode?
Oh yeah, she knew as soon as like fall was coming, and the shorter days, like that really affected her, and she tried to go get therapy and use lighting and stuff like that, but it didn't. It really didn't help her at all. So this is a real disorder that really can be very debilitating. I know around the holidays there's so many triggers for people. Like you mentioned, the Grinch, and there's Hallmark that's on, and Charlie Brown or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, whatever it is. The radio is playing Christmas songs. Those can be trigger to when things may have been happier for you around the holidays. What do you tell your clients about triggers during the holiday season? Because there's so many everywhere. You can't go anywhere.
Yes, absolutely. You can't go anywhere. You can't. You're right. And I don't mean, cocoon up. But again, I'm gonna build off of what what we were talking about earlier with being proactively reactive and being intentional in, first of all, naming, especially, if one of the things that we hate hearing it in the moment, that, hard times make us stronger, right? I don't know about you. It's almost like when someone tells you to relax, right? When you're stressed out, it doesn't help you. It doesn't feel helpful in the moment, but there is a lesson sometimes that I think we build resilience from in those tough times. And if you have had the unfortunate experience, right, of going through the holiday season before, especially, after experiencing a loss, let's say, I have in my experience, both professionally and personally, seen people experience it as a lesson, right? In ways but again, it's being intentional in looking for that lesson. And that's kind of a double-edged sword, because I'm going to be real with you, Nancy. I think what's really tough is that as human beings, we're wired to run away from discomfort. Your friend, that went through that divorce, I'm so glad that she reached out to you during that time, because that is a real loss. If we compare divorce, to a lot of people to a death. I'm so grateful that she reached out to you, because someone else may have shook it off.
No, and I kept checking on her. Because it really, she used Connecticut paid leave to take a month off of work because she couldn't focus and she was very sad. And so I'm happy that she used our resource for that. But like the question I'm thinking, should people avoid things that make them sad?
It is absolutely okay to say no. Like I said, I think the holiday, if we, look at it this way, it can be almost a training ground, right, for practicing this, right? And I think that saying no, honestly, in terms of, like going to that holiday party, it all can be much less intimidating if we're very mindful in how we do it, right? So again, having that safe person I mentioned earlier, I think that can be so helpful. If you're able to identify someone in your life, you're extra blessed if it's someone in your personal life and therapist that you trust and have a good rapport with, but someone that also loves the Grinch too, right? Because he can relate, you know what I mean? Can relate to that feeling, you know what I mean? Not one that wants to ruin Christmas for everybody else, but also not one that expects the aha moment, that does not happen.
Suicide is higher around the holidays. Domestic violence is higher around the holidays. And I know that if you're in recovery for addiction or eating disorders, this is a hard time of year. What do you tell people who might be struggling and suicide ideation might be high around the holidays, domestic violence? What would you suggest to people?
These areas almost relate in a way where they're spiked because of a lot of what we refer to already of that pressure around everything being amplified. So say you're someone that already maybe pushed through the pressure of going to that family event you didn't say no to. Maybe you should have. Maybe you should have. When we're thinking about someone that's struggling with substance use disorder, right? Relapse is something that's extremely prevalent this time of year.
Because you associate, going to parties or having holiday cheer. Like that's what everybody talks about. So, there's that pressure that you need to live up to that expectation.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. There's also people being people, right? People go with what they know works for them, right? And if you're someone that has struggled with substance use disorder, self-medication, let's say you also struggle with, because substance use disorder usually doesn't come alone. You may also struggle with social anxiety, or maybe you're at that family event that you didn't say no to, but maybe should have. I don't know. And now you're sitting across the table from that estranged parent, and now you're triggered. And what has worked for you in the past, unfortunately, is self-medication. And and I think keeping those things in mind too, if you are someone that struggles around the holidays or has a loved one like you referred to earlier, and if these are someone that struggles with, and this is something I've heard a lot so much is, oh, not my Johnny, he's so stable in his recovery. And hey, there are so many people that get through it, but I have seen a lot of people struggle. And I think that's also why a lot of programs like AA, NA, they do offer a lot more support during the holiday time. But again, I think being very mindful and planning for that. Again, when we're thinking about addiction, a lot of it is where, when, and who, we're being around, right? Who is influences us in different ways, because, and this is again where that weird correlation is between these areas, is that, these pressures, it's almost like they all kind of tunnel went into a tornado, if you will, together. People are asking, what's new at work? Well, what if, if you turn on the news and not everyone's doing so well in the job market. You know what I mean? Some people are struggling, like mentioned with different examples, everyone has their own stuff. I think they all turn to a whirlwind when we connect them with these other facets that some struggle with, because then someone that may already have been struggling with an insecurity around, let's say, their finances and their ability to provide for their family after a job loss, and also might struggle with a history of self-medicating, and now is going home and maybe it's taking it out on their wife. Unfortunately, these things do, correlate and also increase for a reason. And I think when you think about it that way, if that makes sense, with everything kind of staying in that tunnel wind, depending on what that tunnel wind looks like for a given family or dynamic, with the environment, the context, I like to think of it as our internal battery, if you will, especially if you're someone that, struggles with something, like substance use disorder, or know of someone that has struggled with a history with domestic violence, just struggling with, self-harm, is being very, and again, I mentioned it earlier, but I feel like with holidays, it's almost like we put pressure on ourselves. And again, I think it's important to ask ourselves, where's this pressure coming from? I have to do that. Is it coming from me? So, who's really putting the pressure on you to go to this event? And is it that you can't miss it, or that you don't want to miss it? And it's usually that I don't want to, and maybe I should explore that a little bit more. Because when we don't say no, especially when we're looking at areas like this, that's when those tunnel winds can turn into a full-blown tornado. And statistically, these episodes, tend to skyrate. One thing that's interesting, though, to keep in mind about suicide that I found interesting in my research recently, the Trevor Project, I believe in 2019, they kicked this off, and I even saw some even recent ones too. And it makes a lot of sense where there almost is, because it's not uncommon for some individuals to experience euphoria type energy or express that if they're struggling with suicide ideation, especially if they're really at risk for following through with a plan and it's around the holiday season. What was interesting was actually there was a stat that statistically the numbers seem to increase more so, and this wasn't just in the U.S., it also looked at numbers in Australia around this and domestic violence. They actually tend to be more so around New Year's Eve than Christmas. And at first I was like, what? No, get out of town. But then I was like, if I'm being human, I know I like to show up as my best self on Christmas Day, and that's usually when everything's magical. I'm not saying a New Year is a magical thing to celebrate, but I also was reflecting back on my domestic violence work at an agency out in Torrington that I worked with before Mental Health Connecticut. But I remember learning about that trend and being on the lookout for it and seeing it in the courtrooms, seeing the increase, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes.
But it makes sense. There's more liquor involved, celebrations for some. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can resources like Connecticut Paid Leave help your clients? Because we do offer up to 12 weeks of income replacement to deal with serious mental health issues like depression or anxiety that may affect your daily life, like going to work. And how do resources like this help your clients?
You actually are giving the gift of time, and people don't realize it's there. My boss wouldn't want me to show up, if I needed that time, because I wouldn't be showing up to present my best self,
Exactly.
And, mental health should be just as, I think prioritized, because when we don't do things like look, like get curious and act, and explore resources like the ones that you guys offer, man, that's when some of these situations, some of these circumstances that I see people struggle with estranged parents, even, especially if they don't say no, maybe, right? Maybe this is their first year learning that lesson, right? That's when, and let's say maybe they also have a history where they're struggling with, substance use disorder, right? Or someone else in their, family is. That's where that tunnel wind can happen too, when we don't take that time off to be intentional, maybe to plan an extra session for therapy, to talk about what am I going to do when that anger pops up this time, or that instinct to self-medicate pops up.
Right. And we also have caregiver benefits at Connecticut Paid Leave. It allows someone who's related by affinity. So that could be a neighbor, a best friend, a live-in partner, to take time away from work to help you if you're debilitated by your mental health during the holidays.
I can't tell you, Nancy, how excellent it is to hear that this having some light given to it, this need. Because the caregivers, when we're talking about chronic illness, we're talking about someone struggling with something, a mental health trigger around the holidays, right? Or an episode or something very debilitating happening, right? Regardless, caregivers are, really, really tying everything together. They're the people that you don't realize are taking that time to step out from work. And their boss doesn't like it when they're giving just a 15-minute break at Applebee's, let's say, to call this doctor, just to be told, nope, you should call this specialist for your mom, or what have you. You know what I mean? Or if they're lucky to even get to work, maybe it's make sure that mom gets to an appointment all right, or gets her prescription. There's a lot of moving parts in the health system that unfortunately don't always work the best. And I think too, especially if you're dealing with something like depression and anxiety, the last thing you want to do is reach out and be on the phone with 30 different people. I'm just going to be honest, to figure out, to get to the bottom of, a treatment plan or what have you, or access to a need, so that need is definitely there, because these supports need to be accessed. And like you said, things like seasonal affective disorder can be very debilitating.
And what would you like people to take away from this podcast?
I really would like people to take away, again, looking at, having self-compassion, that, they are only human. At Mental Health Connecticut, our 4 pillars really stand on respect, accountability, integrity, support. That's our other pillar, right? Give yourself the same support you would a best friend. I'm sure your advice to them probably wouldn't be, you should push yourself to go to that party where that aunt is. That's going to ask you that question that she asks you every year, that you call me crying about every year following. Being overall, I want you to be kinder to yourself, us to be kinder to ourselves, to check in with that internal battery, to be proactive and intentional with how we plan. Think about what really brings you joy versus what you're told is supposed to bring you joy, right? And being intentional and planning around that.
I want to thank my guest from Mental Health Connecticut, Patricia Seaver. Thank you so much for all this great information and for helping people who may be having difficulty during this holiday season.
Absolutely, Nancy. It was great talking with you about it.
Thanks for being a guest on the Paid Leave podcast, Patricia, and I hope you enjoy your holidays.
You too. And I hope everyone, again, has a good holiday and shows themselves some self-love and learns that it's okay to say no.
If you or someone you know is having an emergency, please call 911. If you're suffering from domestic violence or suicidal thoughts, please call 888-774-2900 or text, mail, or chat with ConnecticutSafeConnect.org. You can also text 988 for addiction, suicide, and domestic violence help. And in Connecticut, please dial 211 for local resources or services for help. For information or to apply for benefits, please go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.